Welcome to this week's Session Spotlight. I'm Paige Taylor. It was deadline week at the Oklahoma State Capitol this week. Each chamber needed to get bills off their floor in order for them to be considered across the rotunda in the opposite chamber. This made for a busy week and long floor sessions as lawmakers worked to consider bills. Conversation surrounding lab-grown meat has picked up nationwide as the FDA recently gave the green light to lab-grown meat. It's a topic Oklahoma lawmakers are also addressing with legislation. So what is lab-grown meat? Well, cell-cultured meat, also known as lab-grown meat, is produced by growing animal cells in a controlled environment without having to raise or slaughter animals. There have been several states that have also started working to control lab-grown meats this year, including Nebraska, Mississippi, and Iowa. Last year, Alabama, Arizona, Florida, and Tennessee all considered legislation to prevent the manufacturing and sale of these products. The bills failed to make it through the legislative process in both Tennessee and Arizona. Florida's was signed into law, and it's now illegal to manufacture the cultivated meat to sell or distribute. Violators can face up to 60 days in jail. In Alabama, the penalty under law is up to 90 days in jail. Oklahoma lawmakers introduced several pieces of legislation surrounding the topic this session. The House passed House Bill 1126 this week, designed to ban misbranding of foods like lab-grown meat. Senate Bill 96 would create the Oklahoma Meat Consumer Protection Act. This would require a person or company to disclose whether a product is a cell-cultured meat. This bill advanced out of the Senate earlier this month. And Senate Bill 1079 would stop restaurants from selling lab-grown meat. A bill that state representatives spent a good chunk of time debating this week was House Bill 2829, which would ban the manufacture, sale, or distribution of lab-grown meat in the Sooner State. Here's a little bit from the debate from lawmakers both for and against that bill.
If my colleagues are so certain that this is wrong, I look forward to seeing them all reject the next bread roll that sat down at the dinner table, because yeast too is cells that continue to duplicate. I acknowledge and admire that my colleagues have figured out how to read biology and use it in their arguments, because we have tried to use biology and other scientific arguments time and time again in this room to argue against dangerous legislation, to no avail, unfortunately. But most importantly, I just want to point out to my colleagues and to you, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to the author, who I know is enjoying this conversation, that this is just the height of hypocrisy. And it's not this isn't a hill that I'm going to die on. It's just something that I'm going to take a few minutes of our time to ask you to pause and think about. Because we are all about freedom in the open market until we're not. We're all about the all of the above energy approach until we're not. We're all about medical freedom unless we're not. And I just wish that my colleagues would call this what it is. We want to pick winners and losers in this building. And in this case, the winner is the beef industry, and the loser is an innovative new science that's trying to create non-meat alternatives for people who need that for their diets.
This lab-grown mess of cells that we have never dies off. And that's great for mass production, but it raises a big question. And this is the reason that we need to ban this. What does eating these cells do to us? Nobody can tell you. They can give you the short range, well, we eat Twinkies and we do this. This is not Twinkies. This is cells. This is a glob of cells that we have here that we don't know anything about. Normal cells know when to stop dividing. These don't. They keep going and going and ignoring the body's usual off switch, just like tumors do.
Oklahoma lawmakers are once again looking at sports betting this legislative session in a few different bills. This week, the Oklahoma State Senate passed Senate Bill 585, which would allow the Oklahoma City Thunder to license sports betting on non-tribal land. This bill would allow the Thunder to partner with sports books for bets placed on non-tribal land. But Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt says he isn't a fan of any of the sports betting bills lawmakers are considering right now.
None of those bills that have moved off the floors of the House or Senate have got my input on them. Matter of fact, they've excluded the governor of the state of Oklahoma from these discussions. So when they say that all stakeholders have come to the table and have agreed on something, the taxpayers that are represented by the governor Governor has not weighed in on those things. So again, conceptually, we're fine with sports betting. But ultimately, it's got to be a free market solution before I would put my signature on a bill like that. So we're not going to do something that is not market what other states have done. This is not complicated. If any single business person was sitting in my shoes representing the taxpayers of Oklahoma and would look at what they were doing in New York or New Jersey or in every other 40 states that offer sports book, this isn't complicated. You simply create the program that other states do, and you can roll that out. That was the plan that I put forward, and unfortunately, those aren't the two bills that are moving across the Senate. These are tribal push bills that are only going to benefit the tribes and not the citizens of Oklahoma. What you're seeing across the finish line here is an industry, the tribes in this case, coming to the legislature saying, this is good for me, run this piece of legislation, okay? That's not the type of governor that Oklahomans elected. There's no possible way that I'm going to let one industry come into this building, give someone a sheet of paper and say, run this bill. I think that's the height of corruption. It's unbelievable. And Oklahomans need to know what happens whenever these bills come to my desk that are being driven from industry-specific people. I'm not going to do it.
Wind turbines brought lots of debate to both the House and Senate floor this week. Each chamber considered legislation to establish setback requirements for how far back a wind turbine can be placed from someone's home in certain counties. This would mainly affect counties in eastern Oklahoma. The House passed a version that would establish a setback requirement of at least a half a mile away from someone's home. Oklahoma House Speaker Kyle Hilbert says coming into this session, it was a priority for the Republican caucus to consider legislation setting reasonable setback requirements.
So this issue is a really tough one. But the challenge coming into session is we knew for our caucus, we had members all over the board. We had a majority of our caucus that wanted to address setbacks in some way, shape, or form, but trying to figure out, I mean, you all saw the legislation that was filed on it. Some was very, very large setbacks, even a moratorium of wind completely, to very small setbacks, and trying to find what can actually pass. And what you saw was pretty incredible. I thought yesterday, 68 members of our body passed it, sent a strong message of, again, reasonable legislation that's good for the people of Oklahoma.
The Senate passed a similar bill this week, but its bill outlines different parameters from the House's bill for the setback requirement. Senate Pro Tem Lonnie Paxton told reporters on Thursday legislation on this topic is a top priority.
You know, that is not a settled situation yet. There's a bill coming from the House, there's bills coming from the Senate. That's a big issue because you know, it's a property rights issue, and you saw people taking sides on this issue that, you know, and I made a debate in favor of the bill because I think we do need to do something, but you also have to respect people's property rights. So that's kind of, and if you listen to that debate today, it was a very robust debate with a very different mix of people who were for it and against it. And it was, and also people were for it, but they still want to see things change to make it maybe a little this way or that way, and what is the proper distance. So that's a big bill. The bill we passed today was a 1/4 mile. That to me seems a lot more rational. Half a mile pretty well bans the industry. I mean, you think about a section of land, if you have to be half a mile from anybody else's land, even somebody that owned, you'd have to own an entire section of land and put the wind turbine directly in the center of it. And I think that would be far enough away, but it would be right at, I don't know, I don't think that's what we need. The issue is, you know, right now there's not a setback at all. So, you know, they can put these things pretty close to homes. They can put it next to people's property. There should be a little bit of setback. But so property rights, we're going to protect those. I think the 1/4 mile is probably a lot closer to where we need it to be.
And that's your session spotlight. Check out my Capitol reports every Monday through Thursday on Fox 25. I also provide a look ahead at what bills will be heard on Sundays. For even more in-depth coverage, go to OKCFox.com.